I will not let go of you. Jacob's life was full of uncertainty, full of chaos, full of confusion. And in the midst of that, he heard this promise and a dream. I will not let go of you. So imagine God in whatever form that looks like to you, and no, God is perfectly fine as you're imagining. So imagine whoever that is, reaching out to Jacob, grabbing him by the lapels, staring at him with a gaze so intense that Jacob could not look away, and saying, I will not let go of you. For Jacob, a dream like this, a promise of care, of protection, of belonging, must have risen up out of the deepest longing of his soul at this time. Because Jacob was not safely at home, surrounded by all he knew and loved. If you are familiar with the story, you know that Jacob was out in the desert all alone, vulnerable to attack by thieves or animals, with only himself to rely on. Jacob was on the run, and it was of his own doing. He was running away from his family, from a people and a place of deep belonging. So yeah, it was Jacob who put himself in this tough spot. It was Jacob who tricked his father into giving him a blessing that was meant for his brother Esau. It was Jacob running away from a very violent and angry brother, which some of you might understand if you have siblings, who was like, I cannot believe you did this to me. He was threatening to kill Jacob, so Jacob ran for the hills. And it was there in a desolate place where he paused to catch his breath, to get a little bit of sleep, that Jacob lay down and allowed himself to dream. We heard about that dream story earlier in worship from Jennifer, and in it, the image of the ladder with the ascending and descending angels, a ladder connecting heaven and earth. A dream filled with the promise that the very land he was lying on, this hard, packed dirt, dusty, inhospitable land, was to be the place for him and his people. In the midst of his isolation, he dreamed of an assurance that soon he would be held in embrace once again. Jacob adrift in the desert. This desert imagery is so often used to portray a sense of feeling lost or abandoned or all alone. But for any of you who love the desert, you also know that there is a complex beauty to it, and that while the landscape looks harsh, it's actually the perfect environment for a whole beautiful ecosystem. And so retreating into the desert, both literally and also figuratively, provides an opportunity for our minds to wander and wonder, to consider anew our own lives, to find the stillness, to craft meaning. Annie Dillard writes, "We live in all we seek. The hidden shows up in too plain sight. It lives captive on the face of the obvious, the people, events, and things of the day to which we as sophisticated children have long since become oblivious. What a hideout. Holiness lies spread and born over the surface of time and stuff like color." For Jacob, holiness spread over the desert and entered into his soul. He consecrated his place of rest and he named it. And he found renewed meaning and purpose in his life. In her book, The Power of Meaning, writer Emily Esfahani Smith argues that in today's culture, we have thrown out the search for meaning in favor of madly chasing after happiness. Happiness versus meaning. Happiness brings a fleeting feeling, almost like ice cream. It tastes really good in the moment. And then maybe a little bit afterward, we're feeling like we should have had something a little more nutrient dense for our supper. I'm sure not that any of you have ever had ice cream for supper. But what we're really after in our lives is not necessarily these fleeting moments of happiness, but a deeper, more abiding sense of meaning. That what we're doing matters. That the mere fact that we are even here on this planet matters. Smith suggests that finding meaning does not have to be a mysterious search. And as people do who write books, she has given us 4 pillars through which we can find meaning in our lives: belonging and purpose, storytelling, and transcendence. They're all necessary components. And today we're exploring belonging, knowing who you are, knowing whose you are, feeling at home in the world. And we'll think about those other 3 in Sundays coming up in July and August. So going back to Jacob and his story, it's pretty easy for me to identify with a part of his story where he's physically and emotionally cut off from everything he knows. I have those moments myself more than I like. And I wonder if any of you have those moments at times as well, where you're feeling really physically or emotionally cut off from the people around you. Jacob felt this way after this period of high family drama, but it doesn't have to take that for us to have this feeling inside. It can come on us all at once. Here we are at a party. We're supposed to be feeling happy, and yet we feel so alone. Or maybe we're hiking with a group of people and we're surrounded by all this beauty, and yet suddenly we feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so small and insignificant in this world. Or maybe we come into a church service seeking something, and as we're sitting in the pews, we realize I'm sitting here kind of alone, and that doesn't always feel great. It can make us question the meaning of life and our own place in the world. Unitarian Universalist minister Forrest Church recounted a story about poet W.H. Auden, who was visiting a nightclub in New York City. And so he chose a table over in the corner of this dark nightclub where he could watch all the people. What are they doing? And he noticed these expressions of boredom and futility and disillusionment. And it struck him so much that he took a placemat and he scrawled off a poem in reaction to seeing people who seemed just so disconnected from each other and the world. He wrote, "Faces along the bar cling to their average day. The lights must never go out. The music must always play, lest we should see where we are. Lost in a haunted wood, children afraid of the night who have never been happy nor good." We try to surround ourselves with things, or maybe we surround ourselves with people, or maybe we surround ourselves with food or alcohol, something that we latch onto that helps us fill up the hole, that helps us open up in here, we think. If you have times when you are having that feeling of isolation, yearning for something more, of course you are not alone. This is pervasive in United States culture. National Public Radio reported in May of this year that Cigna, a health insurer, conducted a nationwide survey of 20,000 people. And the survey they used was a survey called the UCLA Loneliness Scale, Has anyone ever heard of a loneliness scale? Some of you have. I had not heard of that before. And scores on the scale range from 20 to 80, and people scoring 43 or above are considered lonely. So I'm going to share just a few numbers with you. More than half of the survey respondents, 54%, said that they always or sometimes feel that no one knows them well. 2 in 5 felt like they lack companionship and that their relationships are not meaningful and that they are isolated from others. And a picture that is often painted is that it's our elders in our society who are the most vulnerable to these types of feelings. But according to this survey, it's actually our younger generations reported feeling this way much more than people from our elders. So we can point to many things as possible causes of this sense of loneliness. We point at things like social media, everybody's on their phones, they're not looking at each other. We point at things like long commutes, we're in our cars, and no way are we gonna look at people on either side of us on the freeway. We point at things like the long distances that some of us live from extended family. And researchers and thinkers all have their ideas about that, and you probably have your own ideas about that too. But what helps people feel less lonely, which is what we really care about, right? How do we not have this feeling? One characteristic is shared across all of the age groups in the Cigna survey. Respondents who have more in-person social interactions on a daily basis reported being less lonely. In-person social interactions on a daily basis. We're here at Troop almost 7 days a week. Not that I mean this to be a total advertisement for why you should come to church, but I just did. I will not let go of you. I will not let go of you. That phrase has been reverberating in my mind all week with the image of this something, not sure what, reaching out in the biggest bear hug embrace, shouting that I will not let go of you. But I've also been imagining the person on the receiving end of that. Can you imagine a something coming at you like that? Promising you to not let go? What a wild and enthusiastic embrace. And you have to be ready. You have to want to be held, right? Or you look like my cats do when I bring them in my embrace, which they hate. Have you ever tried to hang on to someone or something that just didn't want you to hang on? It is painful for both of you. So back to our story, Jacob has to be willing to surrender. He has to be ready and willing for God to hang on. That's the way the blessing works. There are way too many things that I have tried to hang on to long past their time. There are parts of my identity no longer true or relevant, even though I want them to be true and relevant. And of course, all along the way, there have been people unwilling and ready to be part of my embrace. So when we think about belonging, its willingness to belong is an important component of it. In her book on meaning, Smith names 2 conditions that cause people to feel like they belong. 1, they're in relationships of mutual care. And 2, it's these frequent, pleasurable interactions with others. That piece about the mutual care feels really important. It points to the responsibility that's held by both people. Some of the times in my own life when I felt like I didn't belong, there were ways in which I was cutting myself off from those around me. I was not letting myself be part of community. I decided people didn't like me. I didn't want to extend my own energy so that people could get to know me. And I would create barriers to put people at a distance. So when it came right down to it, I don't think I wanted to risk vulnerability, to put myself in the desert of my own free will. felt like I was running away from others. Researcher and writer Brené Brown writes that vulnerability is about showing up and being seen, allowing our imperfections to be visible and known, being courageous enough to ask for help or to own the mistakes that we make, or even to set our own standard for what success will look like in our own lives. Vulnerability is about letting yourself be held by others, which in turn leads to this sense of belonging. And what would it take for you to let yourself be held by a community? What would it take to let yourself be held by this particular community of people? Jacob's story doesn't end with that one blessing from God. His life doesn't suddenly become perfect. Jacob and God don't sail off into the sunset in a happily ever after story. A whole lot of things happened to Jacob, and just like in our lives, some of them were really, really good, and some of them were like, Jacob, what were you thinking? Come on. He lives and loves and makes mistakes. And one of those mistakes is a really big mistake that leads Jacob back into the desert, yes, again, to flee a new place that he had called home. And just like before, Jacob winds up alone in the wilderness, and he settles down to sleep and pray. And what happens but that he dreams, and an angel or God of some kind visit him in this dream, and they wrestle all night long. And as the day begins to break, Jacob looks at this person or figure and says, I will not let you go. Jacob is the one hanging on. And that is when he receives his blessing and a name change to Israel, and where he consecrates that site as sacred. In reaching out and holding and being held and trusting and being trusted, Jacob realizes that his life has been saved. Reverend Barbara Peskin writes, we are held in an embrace invisible yet infinite, moving with all creation between wholeness and fragmentation, moving always toward the one. Small joys and great sorrows pass, and we, with steps uncertain, move on to whatever is next, but continually seen, heard, held by life infinite and remote, intimate and abiding. Love will not let us go. May you be ready and willing to accept the embrace of love as it comes, of the family of your choosing, of this community, now and always. May it be so. And we sing together our